You're listening to There's Sometimes a Buggy, irresponsible opinions about classic film. I'm Elise.
I'm Dave. This week we return to our Clara Bow Acteurist Oeuvre-view with a pair of 1927 films, Children of Divorce, and the epic Oscar winner, Wings.
First Oscar winner.
Yes, absolutely.
Although Sunrise was released the same year and won a special Oscar for, I think it was called Unique and Artistic Production. Wings won the regular Best Picture Oscar, so what does that mean? I guess that's the context in which we'll be discussing this.
The crowd pleaser.
Beginning with Children of Divorce then, well, these two films actually have something in common besides Clara Bow and Gary Cooper. Gary Cooper more so in the first one.
It's pretty interesting. We've now seen 3 films with Clara Bow and Gary Cooper in them, and in none of them is he at all interested in her, even though in one of them he has to marry her against his will.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, we'll be discussing what becomes of Clara Bow's persona in these films and how the films are using her. Related to that, what I was going to say is that they share the screenwriting team from It.
Really? That's surprising.
Which is Louis D. Leighton and Hope Loring. We'll talk more about what they contributed to Wings when we get to that film. But obviously, at least Clara Bow's parts were being, well, in Children of Divorce, I guess the whole film was being tailored toward her as Paramount's biggest star at the time.
In a pretty interesting way. They were taking some chances with her.
You'd be hard-pressed to identify these as 2 films with the same screenwriting team.
I had no idea. I didn't notice. I didn't
Although,
even
of course,
think it was possible.
Obviously, they have different source material. Children of Divorce was ostensibly directed by Frank Lloyd, who directed an earlier Clara Bow film that we watched for this series because it still exists.
Black Oxen.
Black Oxen, which was pretty good.
And he would go on to direct many sound films as well that I have seen, like Cavalcade. We're even going to see him again in Hoopla.
Yeah, in this series. All sources proclaim that Josef von Sternberg played some kind of a large role in the direction of the film. So here's a quote on that I found online. Schulberg decided the film needed some European sophistication, and he turned to von Sternberg. The actors, having gone on to new films, were available only at night, so shooting took place after hours. As all the sets had already been struck, von Sternberg and cinematographer Victor Milner filmed everything in a tent, timing shots between rainstorms. This gave von Sternberg complete command of lighting, shadows and texture imposed a poignant atmosphere not present in Bow's acting. So what asshole do you think wrote that?
Oh, the immortal Baxter.
The immortal Baxter, John Bastard, in that idiotic biography that I suffered through.
I think you did lash out at Baxter when we did our Sternberg-Dietrich pair of episodes.
I did, unless it got edited out.
So listen back to August 2019.
More Baxter bashing, and boy does he richly deserve it. Not content with calling Marlene Dietrich a whore every other paragraph, he also has to take a random shot at Clara Bow, who apparently can't act without the help of von Sternberg's lighting. This quoted paragraph concludes, Children of Divorce showed that von Sternberg could be a company man and work as part of a team. He was rewarded by Schulberg with the film Underworld that would launch his reputation. I actually did, when contemplating the really weird triangle in Children of Divorce, I actually did think about Underworld, so who knows if it was some kind of influence?
Maybe.
On the very odd love triangle in Underworld?
That's a great film.
Yeah. Anyway, I enjoyed this. Although it was very odd.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It's gonna yield many interesting points for discussion, I think.
I actually preferred her role and performance in this to Wings.
Interesting steps in her career progression.
Besides the fact that we don't have a real picture of what's going on with her career because so many films are lost.
Well, that's true.
It really seems like Paramount was making an effort to
diversify.
And maybe put her into every film they could.
Well,
they
that
possibly
too.
could.
Sure, but they're certainly not sticking to any kind of a formula. If anything was going to set the formula, it would have been It, where she is just the center of everything and magnetically attracting everyone. And certainly that is not happening in these movies.
Well, it is interesting to see her getting a chance to do different kinds of acting parts.
Yeah, she's not an It girl in either of these movies.
Just to give you a picture of how we're missing the full picture, film that is lost between Children of Divorce and Wings is Rough House Rosie. The poster for that shows Clara Bow about to take a punch at a guy that I guess is her boyfriend that she's holding by the hair.
Some palooka.
this is the kind of considered historically unimportant comedies that she was playing in between her melodramas. Obviously, that proves that I was wrong when I said that there's nothing macho about Clara Bow's persona.
There certainly can be. In this one, though, she is quite fragile.
Waif with problems, a problematic waif.
Serious problems, yeah. The star billing goes to Clara and to Esther Ralston. No male is billed above the title.
Obviously, the most interesting and odd thing about this film is that it's really a love story about the two women.
Hence the billing.
And hence the poster here on the Wikipedia page, which shows the two of them in a tender embrace. And so does the film, very often.
It does, yeah, starting in the childhood scenes, which are quite great. You think Sternberg had a hand in those?
I have no idea.
There's some really nice lighting in those early scenes.
Like, Baxter makes it sound like he reshot the entire film. How can we know?
No, I guess we can't know.
Not without more extensive research than we have performed.
And we don't trust Baxter's research.
No, I don't. No.
It starts out at a convent, which is an orphanage or quasi-orphanage for children whose parents are not dead, but divorced.
Well, what do you suppose a divorce colony in Paris is? Do people go there after they divorce, or do they go there to get divorced, or both, and then
Probably both. Start hunting for the next spouse.
I guess these are all American divorcees?
Too busy living it up to take care of your kids. So she's dropping off a child who will grow up to be Clara Bow and says, "I'll see you in the summer."
This Clara Bow child is much, much smaller than all of the other children, which originally made me wonder if she was supposed to be much, much younger, but I don't think that is the case. She's just a tiny little waif. And she meets the child version
of Esther Ralston.
Who is Jean and Kitty. And Jean is the only child out of about 50 who doesn't ignore her but takes pity on her.
And she's got that strength of mind and independence because she is the richest heiress in the world, or in America.
Well, that, and also because she has an obsessive
need to
maternal streak.
Nurture, yes.
Yes.
She has a little doll, but now she's got
a live doll.
Little girl, which is even better. It's all established visually, as you would expect in a silent film. These girls crowd around the new arrival and then either taunt her or just leave very quickly, and she's all by herself, about to cry, and a giant blonde girl comes over and takes charge of her life.
And so the story goes, although this is a fateful meeting. This is going to be the story of their lives.
It's quite economically established, but you do really come to believe in the strength of this bond between the little girls, especially when baby Clara runs to get into bed with her protector.
Well, it's all very, very physical. They are all over each other, these little girls. They are just hugging and caressing and cuddling and...
Does this tally with your childhood friendship experience?
No.
You were a very violent youngster. People might have been afraid to get too close to you.
That was with boys.
Right.
If they chased me or so much as smiled at me.
So you didn't cuddle your female friends?
I'm trying to think. No.
I'm not saying that you can speak to the universality
I certainly can't. I had all my life have had very intense female friendships, but none have involved cuddling. No. But I'm not a real touchy-feely. There was more cuddling with my stepsister.
Okay.
That's the kind of thing that this relationship would make me think about. Like something with kind of a one child. I was a year and a half older and larger. Much larger. She was very small. Then we evened out as we got older. Yeah, there's something with like a maternal and protective element to it. Sure. There might be more physical contact in that case.
And into their lives comes...
trouble.
A boy who is being sexually harassed by a middle-aged woman.
Yeah, I can't get over
That's a crazy scene. Was that European sophistication?
Yeah, I can't overemphasize the perverseness of the sensuality on display here. It's all maternal. It's like all this sexual energy toward and from maternal figures. That's this sensual charge of this movie.
No Oedipal transfer in this film.
Well, I mean, the film shows an attempt to do an Oedipal transfer that's only accomplished by the death of Clara Bow's character.
Even there, where's the Oedipal transfer? Gary Cooper is, I guess, now moving into...
It's onto her child.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's still between the child and Esther Ralston. Gary Cooper's just there. He's going to be an appendage.
Well, let's talk about how this develops. Okay, so proto-Gary Cooper, who's very believable as this Gary Cooper type already, even though that really hasn't been established. Isn't he this kid? He's kind of got rough edges, but at the same time, you can tell that he's sensitive.
Sure. And he's on a picnic with a group of well-to-do people outside of this orphanage.
But he's also a child of divorce because of this colony, I guess.
Yeah, and his dad is some kind of fucking weirdo who makes bets with women who are in his peer group.
And I guess I would assume this kid was supposed to be about 14.
Yeah, and he says, oh, you'll never get anywhere with him. He's...
girl shy.
Anyway, he's basically saying, oh, my little boy, he's a bit effeminate. I don't think he's interested in girls at all.
No, I think he's saying he's very boyish.
No, I don't think so.
Oh, all right, fine.
It was more like a dare to see if she could straighten him out or something. That's what I took it as anyway. So she really gets into it and is like, I'm going to go kiss that kid. And he wants no part of her, quite rightly, and actually has to run away.
Okay, we could read between the lines here and say that he's a little arrested in his development. He is, by the age of 14, supposed to be showing signs of sexual feelings, but obviously the sexual feelings in his father's circle are so disgusting to him that that's probably why.
Yeah, he just wants to build bridges. He's like George Bailey.
George Bailey actually is girl shy.
He actually climbs the wall into the orphanage as a means of escape from this woman who almost climbs over after him. Dedicated sexual criminal.
She doesn't have pants on, though, so she can't do it.
Right. So she goes back and the dad claims the kiss. That's the last we see of those fuckers.
He intrudes on this paradise and immediately... well, we think we're going to get a certain kind of love triangle. I thought it was going to be like The Secret Garden, but with the genders reversed, right?
Yeah, it's not a love triangle at all, really.
He likes...
Esther Ralston.
They just sort of make a bargain that she agrees to.
Based on their kind of straightforward, matter-of-fact approach to life and gender roles.
Exactly. So he's like, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to work. And she says, I'm going to grow up and
you're going to work.
And you're going to work and I'm going to have a baby.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, that sounds good. So really what's happening here is that there's this pact of heteronormativity that leaves Clara Bow out of it.
Yeah, they shake on it and Clara Bow starts to whimper a bit. It's not Clara Bow, it's a child playing someone who will grow up to be Clara Bow and says, there's no one for me to marry. And then Esther Ralston, the child that will grow up to be Esther Ralston, goes over and hugs her.
Yeah, Cooper's like not impressed by this at all. He's not sorry for her. He's not anything.
No, he's like, oh, this silly girl.
So they're just...
he knows her too. Like, she's the one, he actually knows her from some previous encounters. And he's still not impressed.
They're just fighting over Esther Ralston. That's all.
Yeah.
The battle is one of, yes, heteronormativity with defined roles that he is way more invested in than she is. Well, she's invested in having the child part, and she needs a husband for that. That's all there is to do with that.
That's what society says.
But her real queer sexual feelings are for this child that she already has.
So it seems.
And vice versa.
And basically from there we skip to adulthood.
You actually kind of see this configuration a lot within the Martin and Lewis films. It's kind of what becomes of the double act of Martin and Lewis when you try to put it into narrative form. Martin is the leading man, and he's romantic because he's able to pass as heteronormative, right? And then he gets an adult grown-up woman, and then they kind of take on a parental role toward Jerry Lewis. But then, obviously, he's left out of the romantic equation and is a queer, pitiful object outside of it that's ultimately resolved in these films by giving him a girl who's exactly like him. And then maybe the tragedy could have been averted if that had happened in this case, but that's not what happens.
No, in this case, it goes in a much stranger way because Clara Bow, the girl grows up to be Clara Bow. She's beautiful and vivacious, as Clara Bow always is, although here with a real depressive edge to her that comes out quite a lot. We meet her as an adult playing tennis. She seems well-adjusted. She's got a young prince that's obsessed with her and wants to marry her.
And now I thought we were going to get a Henry James plot.
Yeah.
Right? I thought we were going to get something resembling the plot of The Golden Bowl, right? Where there's a penniless prince. He's in love with, a girl who moves within these European social circles, but is also penniless.
She's also hunting for money.
And then her best friend might somehow become involved in all of this and get used for her money because she's the richest girl in America, which often shows up in Henry James stories. The richest girl in America gets used in some way. But then that doesn't exactly happen either.
No, but there are trace elements of those plot beats throughout this film.
Yeah, but within this very queer mother-daughter relationship, and also within this tale of what ultimately emerges with Clara Bow's character, is that she's kind of been, like, doomed from childhood by this...
By her evil mother.
By this neglect.
Hedda Hopper plays her mother.
Who we barely ever see.
No, don't see her much, but she plays a key scene right near the beginning where she explains that, yes, her daughter understands her duty. She cannot marry princes just for love. She has to find a millionaire of her own, or else she's going to be unhappy and middle class. That's no good.
Which is all the story of Kate Croy in Wings of the Dove, right?
Yes.
But with a father.
Yeah.
A terrible father. But I never thought of Kate Croy being played as a waif, or Charlotte Stant for that matter. So that's very different.
Well, Helena Bonham Carter does kind of play her as slightly waifish in the film.
Not this waifish.
From the 90s. No.
That's, I guess, the aspect in her death scene that resonates most with Clara Bow's own biographical story, right?
This absent mother, or worse than absent.
Yeah, this history of childhood neglect and trauma, basically really screwing her up mentally.
Right. But all of this also functions as a cover story, right? So Clara Bow, we're told, is in love with the prince. He loves her.
Oh, and didn't you think that was incredible, her reaction to that kiss?
Yeah. And
like, I really thought her acting was very nuanced and very, like, astonishing in this movie.
Oh, it's terrific. Baxter, just don't listen to him. Fascinating scene, that scene, because she lays everything out, explaining to the prince he'd make a great second husband, but she can't start out with him. She's got to get herself a millionaire first, maybe settle down with him later.
When after that, she immediately goes to Gary Cooper and inserts herself between Cooper and Esther Ralston, I thought that this was a plan that she was starting to enact. That she, at the very least, would marry Gary Cooper and then divorce him and get his money or something, and then maybe she'd start trying to shove her friend in the direction of the prince.
Well, I think it is.
But that doesn't happen.
It doesn't exactly happen that way, no, but it certainly seems like that is part of the Matrix.
But also because we've had this Freudian childhood prelude, set up with these characters. Also, she just always wants to insert herself between them because she, underneath all of this, just wants Esther Ralston for herself, and she can't do that. So really, it's this frustration of this queer emotion that's not even necessarily homosexual, like they're not necessarily lesbians, but this, actually this is the one thing it has in common with Wings, is that both of these movies show homosexual desire within what I guess must be what we can call straight people, having nowhere to go in this society of compulsory heterosexuality, right?
Yeah, it's rough.
Compulsory heterosexuality for heterosexual.
She keeps sort of joking, but not jokingly saying, if you don't marry him, I'm gonna marry him. I'm gonna take your place. Can't be with someone, you could try to be them.
In both of the films, again, we see the classic contrast between Clara Bow and a more traditional, more Victorian type of woman.
Mm-hmm. Esther
Ralston really helps us plan along by being so noble and so virtuous. She won't, even though I don't know how much she reciprocates Gary Cooper's feelings, but she is not willing to rush this. I guess she does, because ultimately she does become involved in this tragedy where she doesn't get to be with the man she wants, so she is reciprocating his feelings, but she won't be impulsive.
No, and she also doesn't want him under any circumstances, not in the first conversation anyway. She explains to him, you can't just be a playboy, even though you certainly could be, because your family's almost as rich as mine. You have an engineering degree, I want to see you go use it before I will agree to marry you.
Those were the terms that we shook on as children.
That's right.
And she says, if we both are just living for idleness and pleasure, we'll turn out like our parents, we'll end up getting divorced. So we need, I need
structure.
My baby, you need your work.
You need to build bridges.
That's what's going to keep us on the straight and narrow here. So the movie ends up kind of making an argument that neither divorce nor lack of divorce are any good.
Sure, you could interpret this film in so many different ways, as an arch traditionalist film, or as a very radical film, or as something that's quite confused. And
I think it's confused, very confused, and that's a good thing. I really did like this weird little melodrama.
Sure, and maybe part of its confusion does stem from the fact that it had two very different directors, but it could also just be dialectical, not adopting one final standpoint. It's just going back and forth, considering positions on gender roles particularly. One thing, though, that it does seem to take a stand on is the Protestant work ethic. It does seem to be applauding Gary Cooper's resolve to live up to Esther Ralston's request and start his engineering firm.
He doesn't have very much resolve, though.
Well, he does, because he's an engineer for the rest of the film.
Yeah, except Clara Bow is able to...
just for one evening, right?
One crucial evening, get him to come away on a wild party.
Sure, but then he settles down even harder out of spite against her, right? Like, that's what really wins him over to the Protestant work ethic, so then he doesn't ever have to come home to the wife he hates. But that one day, yeah.
Well, I don't think he wants to do this, but I think he would have done it for Esther Ralston.
The way they present it, these lounge lizards that show up at his engineering.
That is hilarious when she comes off the elevator leading them with her little march.
They're there to undermine his resolve and his moral fiber.
Clara Bow's character is so all over the place. Like, she just goes back and forth between being this sad waif who, well, we know she really loves Esther Ralston. We've seen that she really loves the prince, too. So we know she's capable of loving people, and she doesn't want to hurt people, but she's just so all over the place that she almost comes across as amoral, but then it does come back to the fact that she's just very troubled.
She does not respect the work ethic at all.
Well, this is all a plan to get him to marry her, though.
Yeah, but how could you possibly plan things that well?
Well, I 100% think that's what she did do.
I guess, but...
except that then, afterwards, it's true. She acts like she feels like they're really married, so there's never anything... If she's scheming and plotting, she herself doesn't know that she's scheming and plotting, and that, I've really never seen anything like this before.
The film really doesn't present her as a schemer and plotter. It just adheres to the melodramatic outlines of it are there. Her character should be a schemer and a plotter, but we certainly never... she doesn't seem capable of it.
And she's
too impulsive.
Yeah, and she doesn't act like that's what she's been doing.
Yeah, she's not evil.
But her impulses, it's like there is a kind of madness underlying these wayward impulses.
Yeah, well, that's why I say she's reactive, and that's why I say that she really hates the work ethic, and that's why she gets up this whole crew, this parade of flaneurs to come to the engineering office and start a party there on the first day it opened. And then I just feel like things develop. Everyone does get sucked in. The assistant around the office who's trying to maintain order, I mean, he falls prey to her charms. He's drunk. Gary Cooper, he can't function anyway because the office has been waylaid, and he just starts drinking too and wakes up the next day with a wife. But she seems kind of surprised by the whole thing as well.
Well, she's certainly surprised by how much horror he feels about it. Horror, like Cooper is just acting out horror.
That's reasonable, considering the fact that he is madly in love with Esther Ralston. That is pretty conclusively
And we don't actually know what happened. And she, like we said, she doesn't seem to be consciously manipulative or scheming. So I guess it just merely the fact that they spent the night together in the same room means that they do have to get married.
Yeah, well, they're already married.
Well, that's right. They did get married. So maybe all that happened is it's like the miracle of Morgan Creek, and he proposed to her.
I got a wonderful idea.
Exactly.
Let's all get
Well,
married.
we know he really wants to get married, so maybe he just got confused.
It's on his mind, yeah.
It's her best friend, after all, right?
Sure, you could make that mistake.
Melodramatic developments continue. Obviously, Esther Ralston has to discover this.
That day, when he wakes up married, he gets a letter from Esther Ralston saying, "Oh, I was a fool. I shouldn't have insisted that you get an engineering firm off the ground before we can get married. I'll stand by you. We can work this out together. You're still going to have to work, but I'm going to help help you. I'm going to push you, and I'm on your side. I'm not going to make it a condition of us getting together. He looks at the letter, and now he's really torn up.
And of course, this scene becomes fascinating once Esther Ralston shows up, and Clara Bow does actually seem miffed that once again they are forming this unit, Ralston and Gary Cooper, without her, again, excluding her, and now she feels like Cooper's the one she has possession of.
Just wants something to call her own. Everyone's conspiring against her. She's always the third wheel.
She is genuinely upset by this.
For about 2 minutes.
Ralston is the one who decides that this little temper tantrum, despite the fact that she could interpret this as her best friend completely betraying her, and normally in a melodrama would, or in life, in fact, interpret it that way. Instead, as soon as she sees that her little baby is upset, she goes to comfort her, and their relationship resumes the way it has always been. But this is not presented as some kind of abuse that Clara Bow is doing to her. It's just the nature of their relationship, that one is the child who has these great, great needs, and the other is the mother, and this is the love unit that they form.
And Gary Cooper is just standing there.
And now he's definitely the one on the sidelines again, just like we saw happen with the children, all of whom were very good actors, by the way.
Yes.
Which becomes important later because there's a crucially timed flashback.
Little flashbacks throughout that remind you, oh, this tableau, does that remind you of the orphanage, perchance?
The emotions running through this film are actually weirder than anything in any Henry James story I've ever read. More unconventional two-story tropes, right? Because then Ralston goes to Gary Cooper and says, we have to make her happy. That's what we can do together, now that you've married her. And so you're going to have to, just like I made you start your engineering firm, now you're going to have to make my best friend happy.
Get her pregnant, see what you can
works.
do. Yeah.
The only thing, as I was watching, the only thing I saw that even faintly resembled this relationship between the two women is my own personal interpretation of Gone with the Wind.
Okay.
I think I've brought up parts of this before when we were talking about various different melodramas.
You might as well, because I don't think we're ever doing Gone with the Wind on this program.
Which is a relationship between Scarlett and Melanie. Melanie being obviously the Esther Ralston character. The way I interpret this whole Freudian melodrama and quadrangle, or there's even more angles to it than that in Gone with the Wind, is that we see early on that Scarlett has been neglected by her mother, who is a perfect Victorian female, just like Melanie, and who's always going out and taking care of other people's children. And that is actually how she ends up dying, by contracting a disease.
Yeah.
Which really completely takes her out of Scarlett's life. And Scarlett has never felt that she fits her gender role, although she can't articulate that because she's not an intellectual. So Melanie becomes this ideal woman like her mother that she can't ever live up to. Leslie Howard, Ashley is just her father, this poor, weak man, right? And so it's this whole Oedipal complex playing out between them all, in which God only knows what Melanie's stake in it is, except that she actually appears to be in love with Scarlett. Like, there's no other accounting for why she puts up with all of these things that Scarlett is doing, and that she must further things that she must unconsciously know that she's doing.
Well, maybe, but Melanie in that film is presented as just being a saint. She loves everybody.
No,
Scarlett just needs her help more than anyone.
You haven't watched the film as much as I have,
well,
or as closely as I have. She has a particular love for Scarlett.
A particular opportunity to forgive Scarlett for many transgressions.
No, but I also think it is because she does transgress. I think that is one of the things that she loves about Scarlett, and she talks about like the particular kind of strength that she has, which actually does save her life and her baby's life when they're thrown together. Anyway, so it kind of resembles that relationship if Scarlett understood that she loved Melanie back. But then the new element that comes into it is this child.
Sure. Much more important than Gary Cooper. That scene, Esther Ralston is invited to their home.
Right, so we see that the prince is making a move now on Esther Ralston because she is the richest woman and he needs money, and Clara Bow's out of the picture. But she has decided she will never marry, since she can't have Gary Cooper. So then Clara Bow just happens to come by and see them both and decides to invite them both, her true loves, to their home.
And here Ralston meets Clara Jr.
Yeah, and it's just...
I mean, that is
you know what? It's an even greater passion than when she first met Clara Bow, or what's her name? Kitty?
Yeah.
Than when she first meets Kitty, because it's Gary Cooper plus Clara Bow.
It's the best of both
Perfection.
worlds. She just goes to her like she's in a trance and just hugs this child on the staircase while everyone is waiting to go in to this fancy ball or whatever. It's quite an amazing scene, actually. And the servants come down and everyone has to pull Esther Ralston away from this child.
I guess, obviously, the element of Clara Bow's persona that the screenwriters, who know it so well, are working up in this movie is the child.
Yeah, definitely. There's nothing of the superhero element to Clara Bow in this film, that's for sure.
And
she is
other than that one kiss,
powerless.
One kiss reaction, there is not a lot that's sexual.
No.
Although she's, like, enchanting, as usual, in all of her scenes.
But mostly bringing out the part of her acting arsenal that deals in hurt feelings.
Yeah, I mean, comic moments, but they're fewer and farther between as the film goes on.
Probably the funniest scene that she gets to play is where she is offhandedly pantomiming her young child.
With the big eyes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Great.
So she seems to like the child, but more like a child would like a child than like a mother likes a child.
Yeah, she doesn't seem to have really taken charge the way Esther Ralston would of this youngster's development. They're quite frank with each other. Clara Bow tells Esther Ralston, Gary Cooper's still in love with you. I know that.
Well,
we all know it.
At this party, we also get the development that she sees Prince Vico and realizes that he's still in love with her. And so she is willing to, despite also not liking the idea of divorce for obvious reasons, with this small child, she is willing to do it, to confess she's made a mistake, let Gary Cooper be with Esther Ralston, and she will be with the prince.
But the prince fucks everything up.
What would Ludovico de Saxe be?
It's nothing. Come on.
It's Catholic, anyway.
So yeah, he can't marry a divorced woman. That's out of the question. They have no chance ever to get back together.
Everything is blocked.
But he says he will always love her. So he's ruined as well. Whatever marriage he does get involved in is going to be some kind of second-rate affair. Again, just to get money, if he can manage it.
So at this point, he is really out of it. Like, after this opportunity is denied, he just has no point or purpose in this film anymore.
Not really.
Especially at the end. It's really hilarious at the end.
Just to give some extra stakes, to give Esther Ralston someone to marry. He's such a cipher at that point that it's just like not getting married to marry Prince Vico.
But realizing that all options are blocked is what spurs Kitty on to the self-destruction that was always ticking within her.
Oh yeah, I was afraid this was going to happen, and it finally does. She chooses, I guess, to drink poison.
It is a great shot, that big, distant shot of her
when she
going
walks off into the room.
Through all of the doors.
After writing her suicide note and sending it off to her friend on the day of her wedding, to Prince Vico. She has her final farewell with the child. It is a very powerful emotional scene from Clara Bow.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, she's not a bad mother or anything. She
No.
just honestly thinks that
Esther Ralston will be a better mother.
because she's like the ultimate mother.
Sure.
And because also the parents will love each other.
Well, she's right.
Of course. And she understands that literally the only way to go forward is to eliminate herself.
Yeah, well then there's no need for divorce.
The emotional configuration between all of these characters, because of the heteronormativity stipulation, there is no place for her here, particularly since the child has taken her place. She realizes the only actual existing people in the universe are Esther Ralston and Gary Cooper.
And they've got a child
And
to
now
bring
they've
up.
got a child that is her.
Yeah,
And
they could
so-
start over and do a better job. They can get a better version of Clara Bow.
She can only be the child in this configuration, and now there is an actual child, right?
Yeah.
So she just doesn't exist. Well, obviously, the letter arrives, and both Jean and Vico, but Jean first, receive the message and run off to see if they can somehow intervene and prevent the woman they love from dying.
No, it can't be done. They do get there in time for a little talk.
Yeah,
which
and
is
of course,
always good.
And the only person who goes in, I think the only person who gets there in time is Jean.
Yeah, of course. Well, that's all that matters.
And then they have their deathbed scene together, which contains the flashback of
Sleeping together.
little frightened Kitty climbing into bed with Jean when they were children.
Her night terrors stilled by the maternal presence of her best friend.
At that point, I started sobbing.
Yeah.
It was very effective.
It is.
Then they embrace in bed once more. get a big giant smack on the lips. Finally, the consummation of their passion in death, like Tristan and Isolde.
Heteronormative life can begin truly now between Ralston and Gary Cooper. But it doesn't seem like it's going to be all that much fun for them either.
No. It's going to be great, though, because this little girl it ends with this little girl in Jean's arms.
Yeah.
And this little girl is more traumatized than her mother. So Jean is just like, perfection! This is exactly what I want. An even more traumatized version of Clara Bow to be a mother to.
Sure, and she's an adult now, so she's got more power. She can really just take charge of this and see if she can arrange things in a better way.
And Gary Cooper is out of it, and Vico is completely out of it, just sitting to the side in a chair.
He's just in a daze.
He doesn't even try to go in and see dead Clara Bow or anything.
He's just never getting any money.
He's not getting money.
He was so close.
He's not getting love.
No.
Nothing for him. So I guess there is one element from it that the screenwriters developed in Children of Divorce on the basis of whatever scaffolding the novel it was based on gave them, which is this... We noted the queer overtones of the relationship that Clara Bow has with her girlfriend and their baby, or their baby, her baby, that at one point is attributed to Clara Bow. Well, their baby and that.
Well, they're raising the baby together.
Yeah, Clara Bow has the man's role of being the breadwinner and taking care of them and taking care of the sick woman. So, Wings. It was based on a story by John Monk Saunders, who's come up in the podcast before.
He wrote the original material for The Last Flight, one of my very favorite films, directed by William Dieterle.
As well as Dawn Patrol, the first version of which we have done for the podcast.
Yeah, the Hawks version. And we're actually doing the Edmund Goulding version when we get to 1938. So we'll have covered a lot of John Monk Saunders flying movies.
But the screenplay is attributed to Loring and Leighton.
Once again.
Once again. They were given the story to work over in order to insert Clara Bow because she was such a big star.
She's top billed in this movie. Now, it's not about her. She does have some good moments in it, but I wouldn't say that she is the focus of this film.
There's a quote here on the Wikipedia page for the film to the effect that she said that herself and wasn't very pleased with the role she was given in this film.
Well, neither am I. It's interesting that we get to cover it for this podcast, and I'm fascinated by this role that she has. This is a Judy Garland role in the Mickey and Judy films.
Absolutely, I did think of that. The quote attributed to her, she was just basically saying, more or less, I'm not the hero. Movie is not about me. No. I'm here for decoration.
No, but she's like, it's really the template for what Judy Garland does, right? She's the girl next door. She's in love with this callow guy. She actually goes out and fixes his whole life for him wherever she can.
He's a Charles Buddy Rogers,
yes,
who was known in this period as America's boyfriend.
He's the future Mr. Mary Pickford.
He's obviously much better looking than Mickey Rooney, although almost anybody is, including Judy Garland. So he reminds me more of a, I don't know, kind of an boy next door Archie Andrews type, although...
Well, that is kind of what Archie Andrews is all about, too, right? He's fairly callow. He's the protagonist for no fucking reason, and all the girls love him.
Based on, well, I mean, the whole Archie series was based on the
Andy Hardy
series.
Sure.
Yeah. Anyhow, yeah, and right to the fact that when we first meet him, he's fixing up his jalopy.
Absolutely, that's all Andy Hardy wants to do in the 30s anyway. He gets a little bit more diverse as he grows up.
Now, the way this all came about, it sort of makes sense that you can see that as in Dawn Patrol, and this is what the male characters are doing in the film, the friends, they are doing the Dawn Patrol. I mean, this really is just like a rehearsal of Dawn Patrol, and that would have been the central relationship, the relationship between these two men, their passionate homosocial friendship. So Clara Bow's character is like completely peripheral, has nothing to do with the main thrust of the story.
No, even to the fact that they're not even in a triangle with her. It's another woman who doesn't even really matter who's the actual center of the triangle, the nominal triangle.
But this is the thing that I'm talking about. Like, obviously in the original structure of the story, there was a nominal heteronormative triangle to structure this homosocial relationship, which was this non-entity of a woman.
Right.
Right?
And then they were like, well, we can't have Clara Bow play that character,
exactly.
so we have to invent another one.
And therefore, she has to pretty much not exist from the perspective of the rest of the film until the ending. How it happens that she's completely invisible to this character. She's really only there for the audience to look at.
Fascinating.
Obviously, in the original story, or any kind of plausible plot that could be teased out of this material, he would have gone home and married
the other woman
whose boyfriend he's killed.
Sylvia.
Who's his best friend.
The Paramount story.
And he would have sublimated all his homosocial feelings that way.
The Paramount story, which I'm not reading from on our Clara Bow series, but I will be reading from all of the different story books of the studios when we do our Hollywood year by year. But I looked at it today, and that book had it totally wrong. They say that there is a love triangle involving Clara Bow with Richard Arlen.
Yeah, because that makes more
Buddy
sense.
Rogers. Yeah, they obviously didn't watch it again and figured that's got to be what it is, but it's not. No, not at all.
Despite the fact that there's this whole tour de force sequence that's very interestingly written, set in Paris.
At the Folies Bergère.
Yeah, that climaxes with some very daring and narratively interesting nudity on Clara Bow's part. I was less affected by her performance in this film than in Children of Divorce, because there's only one single note of pathos and masochism throughout for this character.
Right, because she's Betsy Booth.
Judy Garland, she's enjoyable in those roles.
Sure, well...
But I guess it's not giving her the max to do.
Well, no, of course it isn't. But, think of Life Begins for Andy Hardy. He goes to New York, fucks up repeatedly, and Judy Garland, behind the scenes, pulls strings to make sure that he doesn't fall too hard. And it's exactly like that in this film.
But she doesn't show up and see it in front of her own eyes and sob the entire time. Like, the masochism is just...
No, she does. She does see that kind of stuff, but she recovers and
I don't remember
fixes
it well
his
enough.
life. Which is exactly what Clara Bow does. It's really the template for all of the interactions between Mickey and Judy in the Andy Hardy series, anyway.
So you think they watched this film?
Everyone saw this film, Wings.
Yeah, of course.
So, of course, it would have been in the back of their minds. If you're going to do a character like that, this is the way to do it, I guess. And Judy Garland, she is one of the heirs to the legacy of Clara Bow. Not in maybe in an it girl sense, but in the incredible ability that she has to just grab hold of you with the feeling of hurt that she can get into her eyes. Judy Garland does that.
Right, and of course Judy Garland was personally just as fucked up as Clara Bow was.
Absolutely.
Possibly more.
It would be a hard competition to judge.
It was very hard for me to watch her being this masochistic and also being this asexual. It was so strange.
Guess so, but she gets little elements of her more authentic self into the portrayal. It's just that Charles Buddy Rogers is not paying attention. I think she's pretty sexy in those early scenes, and she's trying to get him to kiss her. He's just not able to notice. And her androgyny, or what we were calling her androgyny, also plays a major role in this film, right? Because of her genuine interest in racing cars and painting shooting stars on the car.
Well, they try to give her, yes, some kind of heroic things to do, which is, what these screenwriters did in It. But because the only note for the whole film is this pathos, it doesn't really register, no matter how adorable she looks in that army outfit, or the fact when she falls into that hole with the soldier that she sits there with her legs wide open, not the least bit concerned about ladylikeness, as usual from Clara Bow. So obviously what's interesting about the glimpse of breast, other than the fact that it was permitted, is that it's there to convey acute vulnerability, which presumably is why she agreed to it.
Oh yeah, those guys are so...
Because Clara Bow wouldn't be doing anything that she didn't want to do in films. Couldn't have been. Like, she was their biggest moneymaker.
Those guys are so disgusting, those MPs.
That's the difference between her and Judy Garland. You're not going to have any...
Well, it's a different era.
Well, you're not going to have any shots of Judy Garland's breasts being revealed to a bunch of smirking soldiers.
No, not in the Code era. Of course not.
Well, not at all. Can you imagine? Like, it is a completely different valence.
No, they're not the same in all respects. But that scene in particular, I mean, we're hopping around quite a lot here, which is fine, I think. We're not going to go through the whole 2.5 hour plot of this film, especially since so much of it is war stuff. Very credibly shot.
Oh, well, the film film... Okay, well, let's just talk about the film in general.
William Wellman.
Who was assigned to it apparently because...
He was a flyer in World War
War I. One of the actors, Richard Arland, was as well.
So he did his own flying.
Yeah, and then the other one was also trained so that they could do those close-up shots of them in the planes.
Yeah, it's quite masterfully done. Just on technical merits, you can see why they wanted to give it the Oscar.
The film overall is... You know, obviously I'm thinking of it in terms of other contemporary portrayals of World War I, like
The Big Parade.
And All Quiet on the Western Front. This is like a joke, didn't you think? It was like World War I is boy's own adventure. The other things like Dawn Patrol, to some extent, and certainly The Last Flight, based on John Monk Sanders' stories, have a lot more gravitas than this does. This is like a boy's own adventure spectacle with very belated and contrived gravitas added at the end, but even there, it's more like the whole thing has been this maturing experience for this incredibly callow... I guess, you know, maybe it does work as Andy Hardy Goes to War.
It certainly does. No, it's not as great a film as King Vidor would make, or William Dieterle, I will grant you that, but I do...
Or Louis Milestone.
No, of course not. But that stuff at the end actually does feel like a Verhoevian sucker punch, right? Because it has made you feel really gung-ho about mowing down Germans all through the film, and then it shows you, even before he kills his friend, that scene where the guy is lying on the Iron Cross after, you know, the big victory push has come. It's actually quite effective, and it's making you not feel so great about all the stuff you've been cheering for.
So you think the utter stupidity of all the tropes and the contrivance of the plot, that it all works in a Verhoevian way?
Yeah, now, again, I wouldn't call it anywhere near the equal of The Big Parade or All Quiet or Last Flight in terms of depicting the demoralizing effect of war, but it wound up being more affecting than I thought it would be and more critical of the whole mess than I thought it would be.
Well, just as in, to get to that scene with the two men, just as the real love relationship in Children of Divorce is between the two women, here it's obviously between the two men. That develops under these extreme circumstances.
Yeah, and they start out as enemies because they're vying for the hand of Sylvia.
Yeah, but that's just like I said, it's like an empty, like she's nothing. She is a nothing human. And she just serves this structural purpose of binding them together and keeping them apart for their homosocial romance to develop, which it does over a fist fight, in which, of course, the...
Buddy Rogers just beats the hell out of Richard Arland, which I was not expecting, because he looks wimpier than Richard Arland.
That becomes the whole thing. And, you know, actually...
Richard Arland is a real Christ figure in this film. Poor David.
Well, yeah, he becomes the real masochistic figure, sort of like Esther Ralston in Children of Divorce, this perfect... Well, he's not really parental, but he's just this perfect friend.
He really is.
Who just absorbs all of the callowness of Mr. Boy Next Door.
Yeah.
And they're for like no reason, he and his girlfriend are keeping from this guy, you know, to their utter doom, ultimately keeping from this guy that she isn't in love with him.
Well, that's believable though, right? Because so many people who went to World War I did not come back.
Yeah, I know, but they take it to the limit.
Well,
and
why
beyond.
not? The time to tell him is after they're all home.
But his friend must love the hell out of him.
He does,
in order
clearly.
to put up with all of this.
He does. Yeah, the film definitely makes us feel that that's true.
And then they get their passionate deathbed scene that is the only time I felt emotion. Well, I mean, actually... It does jerk the tears a few times, that farewell scene with his parents.
Oh yeah, that's a great scene.
But the only time I felt really emotionally involved with these characters is in that scene, that deathbed scene. They don't get a full-on-the-lips kiss.
Well, pretty much.
Almost, very close.
Yeah.
But they do get, like, an arm carry.
Yeah.
Which is really something.
Quite a love story between these guys.
I think the model, I don't know of who, whether the screenwriters or Saunders, was the Iliad.
Sure,
in terms
that makes
of
sense.
The mistake, the friends, the war love friends, and the mistaken identity, and the theme, the way the theme of adamant hatred of the enemy becomes the way in which war is protested. So it's not exactly very specific to World War I, obviously, if it could be used in the Trojan War as well. The idea that war is okay and even has some fun elements, but if your hatred of the enemy becomes implacable, that is like the dark side of war, so to speak. Knights of the Air observe chivalry with each other.
Oh, well, yeah, but that's the number one trope of World War I, that this was not the case in terms of the ground warriors, but the Air Corps on the Allied and German side both would observe chivalric codes with each other because they thought of themselves as continuing in the noble medieval tradition.
Right, but we do eventually get shown what's happening to the boys on the ground.
Oh yeah, they're getting ground up.
And these are, of course, all poor men.
Of course, there's a class element to it. You didn't become...
Class and talent.
Yeah, you didn't become a flyer unless you were an officer, and you couldn't become an officer if you were poor, basically.
So Archie Andrews or Andy Hardy, they're wealthy enough to become officers?
If you volunteered and went through the officer training, if you're a working class person, basically, you're an enlisted man. It does show in pretty graphic detail how the combined arms worked during World War I with the planes and the infantrymen and the tanks.
It's such a mixed bag. Like, there's so much fetishism of this war technology, it's almost fascist. But that's... The Iliad also fetishizes war, as Simone Weil, however you pronounce it, talks about.
Well, yeah, it's part of the heroic
poem
tradition.
Of force. And of course all the aerial stuff is like this poetry of destruction. Like when things are blowing up in the air and then the planes or the balloons are exploding or falling and there's this colored and animated looking flames coming out of it.
Yeah, that has to be hand painted.
Yeah, it looks like falling angels. Magnificent. It's Leni Riefenstahl shit, but with aerial fighting.
Yeah, and actually, one thing I've always thought was that Star Wars was primarily inspired by Triumph of the Will in many of its sequences. And I still probably think that that's true, except that the involvement of George Lucas in the soundtrack, anyway, of the restoration that we watched tells me that Wings clearly has been something that has been on his mind since the beginning as well.
Apparently there was a fatal crash of an Army Air Service pilot involved in the making of this movie.
Just like poor Gary Cooper.
Yeah.
His one scene.
His beauty being put to good use to be memorable in this tragic sacrifice of male life because I don't know why, this is what men do.
It's just what men do. And he doesn't even die in battle, right? They're still in training camp. He gets into a mishap. Another plane flies into him while he's doing his figure eights.
I do like this idea that the whole basis of the movie is Andy Hardy goes to war.
Of course, Andy Hardy didn't exist at this time, so we got to give Charles Buddy Rogers more credit than that. He invented Andy Hardy, maybe.
He comes back ostensibly a hero, but he's thoroughly traumatized. He's been given a new haircut that makes him look like little grandpa.
Much, much older, yeah.
Still with this kind of 14-year-old boy face in the middle of it. And I did like the book ending of...
David's parents?
Well, yeah, that, but I was thinking of Clara Bow again. I like the book ending of, obviously, the excuse given for why he doesn't notice her is that they've lived together all their lives and you don't notice what's right under your nose, you take it for granted. And then when he sees her across the fence again, suddenly there is this enormous distance between them that kind of makes her desirable.
And then his confession that in his mind he slept with a woman in Paris was her.
Yeah, but she never lets him know.
So strange.
He's going to tell her about how he slipped up.
So they do get a lot of mileage out of the fact that she is a phantom throughout this film because she was never intended to be part of it, that character. I do think that that's probably the most fascinating thing about this movie. The interpolation of Clara Bow in these weird ways.
Maybe I'd get more out of the performance if I watched it again as a Clara Bow film, which maybe is one of the main ways it gets watched now.
Or people watch it all the time for podcasts where they watch all the Oscar-winning movies.
Sure, exactly. That would be the other way in which it gets watched, because I don't think it's really remembered as a war movie. Maybe watching it knowing that her interpolation is going to be so odd, I would get more out of it. I don't know.
Yeah, when you're watching it for the first time, you're just not looking for these clues that it's all inorganic. the way that she appears and disappears and reappears.
And also, like you said, like you're just not expecting Clara Bow to play a Judy Garland role.
No, I was
Even
never
if
expecting.
she is a Judy Garland that at one point gets to dress up in a sparkly jazz baby outfit.
But I'm happy that we saw this, particularly because it's the first time that it really, really helped to crystallize the very real similarities between Clara Bow and Judy Garland.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I never would have thought of that without this movie. So kudos to Wings.
We mentioned female chaplains. We mentioned Giulietta Messina, and I guess Garland does fall within that. She had her tramp act.
Yeah, she does an actual tramp act in Easter Parade.
But yeah, Garland, yeah, I just, definitely watching these movies, what they also made me think of was how weird and limiting it is to call Clara Bow a sex symbol.
Yeah, we're really dead set against that here.
She doesn't particularly symbolize sex in either of these movies. Even despite the fact that she shows her breasts in one of them. But Jean Harlow too, it's a little odd, like in Red Dust, she is the overlooked woman as well, who is treated by Clark Gable like a kid sister, despite the fact that she's a prostitute.
Sure, well, that we've recognized all along. Jean Harlow is a direct descendant of Clara Bow, but when you can think that the Clara Bow persona is equally behind Jean Harlow and Judy Garland, that's when you start to understand how incredibly rich her persona is.
I'm not sure if you could ever see Clara Bow doing a redheaded woman.
No,
but that's maybe just because she doesn't have the right look. Like, Jean Harlow's really only doing that, besides the fact that she's a brilliant comedian, really only doing that role because she has the right look for it.
Yeah, it's not really part of her persona. That movie is...
But it's brilliant.
It's a one-off.
Yeah.
So I don't consider that... Yes, it's amazing that she was able to pull that off, but that's not what she does.
Well, yeah, there you go. As with Setsuko Hara, a much richer persona than we ever thought.
Next week, it's Paramount, 1936. We're really chugging along through the decade here. And we're going to be talking about Cecil B. DeMille's The Plainsman.
Ooh.
Gary Cooper
That
and
is Gary
Jean
Cooper.
Arthur.
That is Gary Cooper. Whoa, wait, what? Why are we not doing that for our Jean Arthur series?
This was before we had planned for Jean Arthur. So.
Oops.
And our second film is The General Died at Dawn, directed by Louis Millstone. This is Gary Cooper and Madeleine Carroll. So 2 Gary Cooper films where he's actually the star next week.
That should be great.